Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Karastin, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Good morning, Mary. How are you?
I'm well. How are you doing on this last day, or at least this goes out on the last day of 2024?
I hope I'm doing okay when it gets to that. I've got a little cough, so if you hear little sniffles or I've got a cough drop in, but we're doing well. We're getting ready for the holidays, and most certainly looking forward to some time off. And I brought this just for you today. So it's a
Nice,
little.
nice.
It does say 2024,
Oh,
but
okay. Well, we're still
that's all I
in
had.
2024, ringing in 2025, and it is the season to get the sniffles. And doesn't that always happen right around the time where we're taking off for break? But I hope you have a wonderful time with your family. And as you're listening to this, and maybe the day this comes out, probably in 2025, we've got this bright new year on the horizon, a time to think about what 2024 was about. Another interesting year. Um, and what we can look forward to in the future. But all of that aside, I want to know about you. Can you tell us about the first job you ever had as a young person?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this in reflection to get ready for this interview, and I the very first job I remember, like I got money for, was my mother was in university or she was in college, and um, I guess I had to go to work with her one day. So she was taking classes, and while she was taking classes, she worked at a restaurant in town, and I was probably 7, 8 years old, something like that. And they put me in the back. Here's your coloring pages, read a book, draw. And I found myself out where the people are. And so I think after a little bit of going back and forth with my mother, she finally said, like, you can fill people's drinks. And so no one's tea was empty that day. And I received a whole dollar. So that was, for a 6, 7, 8 year old, that was really impressive in the 90s. Um, but the first job I had, that was, I filled out the application, um, got actual money, and it wasn't, riding on the coattail of my mother. Was I worked in university at the little library they had on campus. And I did the things, I checked out the books and I helped people find the books. And that was it. And the two little ladies that were the librarians were just absolutely delightful. But I learned through that just like working that one day for a couple hours at the restaurant, that I want to be where the people are. I got to be um, I got to get all my work done in university, right? I didn't have a lot of homework because the library was kind of boring for me. But but I learned then that that kind of work wasn't really my speed, that I wanted to be like out with people. So those were my first unofficial job and my first official job.
I love that because even from a young person, those little experiences that really seem like one-offs to the adults, or oh, isn't that cute? But for a really young person, that is very formative because we really are contributing. People want their tea filled, they want their water filled. And of course, adults really do like engaging with children who are, who are earnest and providing a service. But I think that also goes to that we all have this desire to contribute, to be seen, to be valued. And also, there's, of course, a desire to be compensated. And so $1, though, to a child is something. But then also the learning of you want to be where people are. That's a lovely reflection from a young age. And that is what you have done with your career. So where did you go after the library?
So I went to a really interesting place, again, a very unofficial job. Um, my grandfather was a deacon or an elder in the Old Cumberland Presbyterian Church. And so we're from Western Kentucky. So, and I still live in Western Kentucky. And so it was a little church, little country church there. Um, and I had the very important job of acolyting, which is bringing in with the candlestick and you know, light the flame and you carry it out. And then because he was a deacon or an elder, I can't remember which one, he would get the communion elements ready. And then after communion and after the service was over, I would get to go downstairs with him and he'd sit me up on top of the counter. And you can't just like throw away communion elements. You have to like either give them back to the earth or consume them. So I got to sit on the counters and drink the little Christian shot glasses of grape juice with my grandfather. And, you know, again, it's one of those moments that you said, you know, adults don't realize what they're teaching, right? They don't realize what they're teaching the children. And so when I reflected on all of this, I really thought about my granddad and how in that moment we're just drinking grape juice, you know. I'm just drinking grape juice with my granddad in a church basement. Um, but when I reflect back on that, I see how he was teaching me to serve. And he did more than that, right? He did more than um, you know, handling the communion elements. I went with my grandfather. He sat on a lot of boards and committees and here in Western Kentucky, and I would go to board meetings with him as a child. And he mowed the grass at the church, and so me as a little kid, I would ride the lawnmower over with him, and we'd mow the grass. And you know, it was just as I look back on that, I see how he was teaching me to give my life for something bigger than myself. And I don't have to be compensated for it. I don't have to have a spotlight on me. Um, I just do it because you do it, you know, because you live your life in service to other people. Um, and so that's kind of where I went, you know, and in a job capacity, I spent, you know, did university, and I ended up going to ministry school in Dallas, Texas. And again, I think a lot of my story weaves in and out with jobs that were paid. And my husband like said yesterday, it's like work with a capital W. Um, it's the work that we simply don't do just to make a living, but it's the work we do to make a life.
Mm.
And so that's really where, like I said, I found myself. So when I was in Dallas, I found myself at a bookstore for the work that makes me a living, and went to ministry school and was also doing university online. And so it was a very full time in my life. And apparently books have followed me. So maybe I'll write one day. I don't know. So yeah, I worked there at the bookstore, but in my in my work that makes a life kind of thing, in my volunteerism, I did a lot of work downtown Dallas with those who were experiencing homelessness, the unhoused, and those in substance misuse disorder. And, you know, reflecting back, that was 18, 19 years old, and I'm mid 30s now. I would go with a group of folks, we'd go around midnight and give bags to folks and just sit and talk. And I'm from Western Kentucky. We don't, you know, it's kind of like Martin. You don't see a lot of variations in stories, you know, and so this was one of the first times for me that I really got to experience someone with a different story, you know. And I remember sitting on the side of the street with a man, and you know, there's a group of us, and he looked at us and said, "Do you know how I got here?" And my little 18, 19-year-old mind could judge the best, the best of them. But he proceeded to tell me the story, or tell us the story about how um, his son had passed away. He was a businessman in a different state. His son passed away, and he found himself on a really dark road. And through different circumstances and making choices that um, were just coping choices, I mean, he ended up losing his house, he lost his wife, he lost his family, he lost his job. And there he sat 17 years later with a bunch of kids on the streets of Dallas. And I carry that with me in my work now because I know that we're all one or two really bad circumstances away from maybe choosing something that as a coping mechanism that we wouldn't normally choose had those things happened, or had they not happened in that way. Um, and so at a very early age, I got the experience to see the world in different lights. And I think that's really helped me in my work with a little W and a big W. The cat is meowing. I don't know if you can hear it.
I can't.
Um, oh, um, so yeah, so I did 3 years of work like that in Dallas, Texas, while I was doing ministry school and getting my degree, and had some great experiences. Worked with after school programs there in Dallas. Worked on some Indian reservations in Mexico, or Arizona, New Mexico, and Mexico. Um, did some stuff in Puerto Rico. All things that I'm really proud of, but really kind of helped shape um, where I'm at today. And so after ministry school and getting my degree, I came home and started working in the nonprofit sector, and have kind of made my home there for the last decade or so.
Yeah, I really like this distinction of work with a big W and a little w. And I know that you do lots of volunteerism, but then as a profession, working in the nonprofit sector, you work a lot with volunteers.
Mhm.
And I want to explore with you a little bit the conflict that happens with volunteers. And there are conflicts that happen everywhere, wherever you have people. You don't have to have anybody other than yourself to have a conflict, but certainly when we have other people, we're going to have conflicts. But my experience is when it comes to volunteering, is a different there's a different tone to the conflict because most of the people who are there volunteering are there because it's a passion, right? They're not being paid to do this. They're doing this because they have a service mentality, because they believe in the project, the city, the cause, whatever it might be. And so there's this kind of passion. And so when conflicts arise, it's of a different kind of tenor. And uh, there's this I, I'm not feeling very articulate as to what exactly it is. But sometimes it's very surprising. Why is this happening? We're all here on this mission that we have decided to be a part of. So can you tell us a little bit about your decades worth of working with others who are volunteering and the nature of the conflict that comes up and how you help people navigate that?
Yeah, well, I think one of the distinctions there, when you're working with people who they're giving their time and they're giving of themselves in a business setting, um, you have these boundaries that when someone crosses them, there are very clear distinctions and consequences, right? Like you don't show up on time, then you get wrote up or whatever. But when someone's coming and volunteering of themselves, for me personally, it adds a little bit more of a lining of grace um, that I might not hold as much in the places where I hired someone. Um, and so it is interesting and unique to figure out how you um, how you navigate that. um, I think one of the biggest things that I have found um, in my experience where I'm working with folks and we're there for a while um, is differing of ideas, right? And you might have someone who um, has been in it and they know, a lot of times with these things, you have a group of folks who that's their work, right? And it's their work with a big W and it's their work with a little w. And they know the flow. And then you have teams that come in and they see it from a different perspective and they might challenge that, right? I know I have been on both sides of that. I've been the team that came in and saw something and thought, well, that's weird. Why do you do it that way? Um, and have gotten the grace given to me um, of, well, this is why we do it this way. I remember when I did some work in Puerto Rico when I was 18, 19 years old, and um, they had a group that worked in and out with folks who were in substance use disorders and in gangs, honestly. Um, and so we as a team would come in and kind of just help that standing group. Um, and there were some really interesting situations that I thought we were kind of being put in, right? Like um, one time, like our whole mission that those couple of weeks we were there was a beautification project, and so we would go into these houses with the gang houses, and we'd paint the walls, right? It's a restoration of dignity, right? It's bringing in the human element to a really dark situation. And 18, 19 years old, I didn't understand that. Um, Now at 35, I can look back and see, oh, that's what we were doing. But I was really confused on why I was painting the house of a gang, you know. Um, and I know that's a really wild example, but it's a real example. And I think about how confused I was, and how gracious those leaders who they're not painting the houses, right? They're there with those people, trying to help them better their lives day in and day out. And they have a vision for what bringing a sense of dignity to those folks looked like. And I just got to be the helper of that. And it wasn't up to me to understand the whole situation. And that takes humility from on this side of it, right? And then I've been on this hand of it where I'm doing the work day in and day out. And that's my most recent experience is that I'm in situations where, um, you know, I'm doing the labor work. Most recently with the 2021 tornadoes. I do a lot of work in Western Kentucky with those and sit on some boards and committees that, um, I've really had to get into the weeds of the why and um, understanding the why there influences decisions that when we get teams in to come and volunteer that they don't understand. Um, they don't understand why you've made these decisions. And I think it's up to me and the team that I have around me to be gracious with them and to try to help them understand the best that we can why we're making decisions. Because I think when you help someone understand the why in conflict, I think it brings an element of just a new understanding, right? You always say clear is kind, and so I think when there is those conflicts on whatever side you're on, asking for clarity, it really helps. And I think one of the worst things for me is to do something and I don't know why I'm doing it, right? whether I'm doing it as a volunteer or whether I'm leading volunteers or whatever, I want to over communicate, you know. Um, Here is why you can't do this. Here is why you can do this. You know, when we're working with the tornado survivors, um, one of the things that we as an organization have really kind of honed in on is um, that when it comes to faith, um, maybe not attaching faith and proselytization in a sense to what the survivor is receiving. And that upset a lot of volunteer groups, right? Because I think, and rightfully, I mean, I don't know if rightfully so, but they have this standard of what they want, right? They want to share the gospel with folks when they come in and rebuild their house. And there's nothing wrong with that. And as an organization, as a leader of an organization, um, I have to, and my team has to learn to kind of safeguard that, right? And that causes a lot of conflict. And we've had a lot of people who maybe choose not to engage with us as a partner organization. Now they work hand in hand with us and all these things, but we don't see eye to eye on that. And the group that I work for, we follow a standard, like a national standard set out. So that helps, you know, when you get into these conflicts with volunteer organizations, that you can say, well, I'm doing this because of something bigger than me. But sometimes you don't see eye to eye, you know, and sometimes when you're working with individuals, it's a little easier. But when you get into these like big volunteer organizations, um, sometimes you just have to say, you know what, be blessed in your work and go forth. But we're not going to be able to come to an agreement here. But hopefully you can come together and see the bigger picture. But sometimes it doesn't, you know.
You know, as you said, it's so much about aligning expectations. And when we are work with a capital W, we have this organizational structure, and we ought to have onboarding processes, and we have these boundaries and this kind of communication, which obviously doesn't always happen, but that's what we ought to be doing, right? And this kind of communication, and so that people, somebody gets hired to do a particular job, and then we see how that works out and what the organization needs, the individual needs, and we have this kind of communication back and forth. I think so many times with volunteerism, we just need people. We need the bodies. I remember working years and years ago on a Habitat for Humanity house in Western Kentucky in Bowling Green when I lived there many years ago. And I was on the roof, me and my husband was either, I'm not sure if he was my husband at the time, but and a lot of other retired individuals who knew about roofs. And it was like three or four of these people on the roof kind of going toe to toe as to how to put this roof together. And I'm looking around thinking, I don't care. Just tell me where to nail, not nail. Just tell me what to do. In that situation, I know nothing about roofs. I'm a worker bee. You just put me to work. These other
Right.
individuals had different ideas, and there was like all of this like rams butting head. And myself, as who I am now, thinks, well, how could we have remedied that? So we've got these people who maybe know how to do these sorts of things. They're coming to volunteer and maybe having an intake like, why are you here? What is it you want to do? Who's in charge of the roof? And this is what I need you to do. And so setting those expectations, because so many times people go into volunteering because they have a passion and they have this expertise that they want to lend to this organization. Sometimes it's just simply their time. I have time, I can fill this box, I can move this from here to there. But sometimes it's a particular expertise. And then they show up and it's not being utilized, or they show up and they feel relegated, they feel unseen. And no matter where we are, big W, little w, we want to be valued, we want to be seen, and we certainly don't want to stand up and show up and stand in the corner, which when planning, when we get too many people, is a problem, right? When there isn't enough
Yeah.
work, meaningful work to go around. Um, and so these conflicts can happen. And then the volunteers themselves can get mad at each other when there's a lack of who's in charge.
Yeah.
But it can sometimes feel like, well, you're not in charge of me. You're not paying me. I'm just here. So how do you could corral people in a group where sometimes that, or have you experienced that sort of attitude can emerge? Who are you to tell me what to do? I'm just here volunteering.
Yeah. And it's hard, and I think every situation with that is different. And hopefully, I know from my experience, there's always been someone who, from the organization that these folks are volunteering with, that should be taking the lead. And I think that's where, as a leader, so if I'm the one who is rallying the volunteers and they're checking in with me, then I need to make sure that I have enough, like I said, work to go around and meaningful work to go around. Um, and if there's not, then I need to honor those folks' time and say, um, hey, we don't have a need, but let me connect you to other folks who do. And that's something we do in Western Kentucky here with the disaster uh, cleanup and things like that. Is we're getting to a place 3 years later where we really only need skilled laborers. And so we are so blessed with folks who want to come in and help, but there's only so many high school groups that you can take, that don't, they're like me at 18, just painting a wall, you don't want me out there, I'm like you, just tell me, I don't even want to be on a roof, like
Not anymore for me.
not anymore. Like, um, so I think as the leader of that, anticipating your needs and being checking your own ego and saying, hey, we don't have enough for you, but let me connect you to other places. And I think as a leader, it takes a lot of humility to be a leader, to be a good leader, right? And it takes an attitude of collaboration, because if I don't have a need for you, but I know this other organization does, but maybe I have beef with them, maybe they did something, it checks my ego to say, am I going to withhold the resources I have, or am I going to freely give them for the good of the whole, you know? So I think that's where it starts. When you get into these situations, sometimes I often wonder, does it go back to the leader who's supposed to be in charge of this? And that's where I'm always going to look first, in the teams that I manage, and um, the folks that I have working for me. If I hear of um, disruptions or things like that, I am always looking to the leader first. Even though, the teams that I have, I trust them. I handpicked them, I hired them. But they're people and I'm people, and we're going to make mistakes. And so I'm going to go back to them and say, tell me a little bit more about this. I'm going to lead with curiosity. And sometimes it is them, when you're in these kind of jobs, um, there's a lot to do and a little to do it with. And the resources can sometimes be slim. And so sometimes the the load of the work versus who the capacity that person has, it's like, well, it just got away from me. I didn't get to do an intake with them the way I should have, or I didn't get to prepare the way I should have. I had this and this going on. And then, we can work through that. Sometimes people be peopling, and you as an organization, you as a leader, you can do everything you can over communicate. We have in one of the organizations I work with, we have a whole packet of that we hand to volunteers, and we walk them through it. And on Monday mornings, we have, here's all the things you need to know, and here's who you talk to, and this and that. And it's still, boy, it still gets confusing with
Yeah.
people, you know? And again, I think for me, I'm going to always try to put a mirror and say, what am I doing?
Mhm.
Um, how am I leading them in my attitude? If we've got roofers up there and they're getting frustrated at each other, and then I show up as the leader of the organization and I am like, well, figure it out and get it together, like that's just that escalates that conflict, right?
Mhm.
But if I show up and say, well, hey, like, remember, Joe, that you were the lead on this project, and Sam, you were the lead on this project. So um, let's take a break, let's take a deep breath, and let's get back and remember the mission. Um, and I think it takes that leader intercepting those things. And I'm someone who doesn't like conflict. Um, I love sometimes just in things that don't involve me. I can be a little, what's the word? Someone called me the other day like a leprechaun, just as in like Irish a little bit, to like just kind of poke it and kind of um, let the conflict be over here, and kind of say things that you might know will kind of get people a little razzled up. But I don't like it when it comes to me. Um, so I think there's a place for that kind of humor, but um, so, but I think like as a leader, when you're in these bigger conflicts, it's not your job to kind of poke the bear, right?
Yeah.
It's your job to go in and even if you don't like it, even if you would rather kind of sit back and watch it kind of play out, and maybe they'll take care of it. It's your job to show up and intercept it and to direct it, um, and help folks in the midst of that. But
And I like what you said several times about this humility. And I think of the phrase, there before the grace of God go I, So
mhm,
when somebody's in a difficult situation, that could definitely be me. That it isn't me, it could be me, but the human condition is such that it could be me, the good or the bad, right? But also the imagination of the other, because I certainly have been in a situation where I felt very prepared. I gave people everything they needed, and you still get these questions, or these, why did this happen? You were told point blank. But I've been on the other receiving end of getting all this information, and it's like, what's important? Who am I supposed to talk about to, and what am I supposed to do? So, that continued imagination of the other without othering them, right? What does it
right.
feel like to be somebody who's not me in this role at this time? And I do think that is one of the main ingredients of a leader is the imagination of the future, but the imagination to really think about other people, that everybody sees and values and feels the things that I do. And one other thing that you said, I thought it made me think of the importance of leaders and their actions. So your people are watching you,
Yeah,
and you might be really good to your people, but if your people see you being petty to somebody else, it is very jarring. I've had that happen a couple of times where I think this leader is doing these right kinds of things, that all of a sudden I see them doing something very petty, like withholding a good
yeah.
because they don't like that person, or dragging somebody through the mud publicly. And I'm like, why is this person behaving this way? It's so unbecoming. It's so not gracious. It is petty. And the fact of the matter is, leaders are people too. They have
Yeah.
bad days, but I think the problem is when they don't come back or acknowledge it or even see it, right? See
Hmm.
that this is a problem. So, as you've developed as a leader, do you have a mentor or mentors that stick out? And can you tell us about that person and what they've done to help you develop?
Yeah. I think I'm learning, I've been in these top positions for about a decade now. And I have to remind myself that um, the people that I admire who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, they have decades of experience on me. And I'm not there. And so I'm in some pretty big leadership roles right now that I don't feel qualified for. Um, but I do realize that it's building something in me. And so I have mentors from the past. You know, I mentioned my grandfather, and um, he passed away when I was 11, but I still remember that. You know, I remember him, um, and how and the lessons that he taught me then. And I think I could name, you know, from every season of my life, someone that I've looked up to, and but I think most recently it's less of one person
Mm,
and more of stepping back with eyes wide open and saying, what can I learn from every person
mm,
I'm with? You and I have gotten to work a little bit together in various ways, and you're someone that I've kind of stepped back to say, what can I learn from Mary? How can I just take a deep breath, be clear, and be kind? And I've taken that, you know, into some different situations. And another friend that we've worked together will say, we're going to Mary Brown it, you know. But it's this moment of like, we are going to access managing conflict in a way that is kind and clear.
mm,
And I have folks who are younger than me that I step back and say, wow, um, they're leading in a way that I want to lead. You know, they're leading with humility, or they're leading with one of my favorite things to learn right now is how to walk into a room, be the leader, but not be the smartest one in the room
mm.
or the
Yeah.
most knowledgeable in the room, but yet I'm the one that's supposed to make the decisions when it comes to the rubber meeting the road. And I've been in situations where I could look at the leader who is making the decision when the rubber meets the road and know that I know more than them because I'm doing the work day in and day out. And so, as the leader who, in this particular situation, I'm not doing the work day in and day out, but I'm leading an organization of people who are doing the work day in and day out. Well, then I'm going to look to them as my subject matter expert, right? They're mentoring me as much as I'm giving to them. They're giving back to me, and I'm listening to them to see what do you need from me, and what can I glean from them, right? Um, one of my mentors is my mother as well. Um, my mom and I have had some really interesting things in our life. She was a kid when she had my brother and me, and we weren't always close. But I have seen her work really hard to become the woman she is,
Mm,
um, and I adore her.
mm,
And I watched her at a really young age um, avoid conflict and kind of take on the weight of everybody and not use her own voice. And I mentioned earlier that that's kind of how I am. I think I learned that from her, that we just kind of take it, right? Um, but so as my mother has grown, so have I,
mm,
and I'm getting to a place, especially over the last several years, where I can look at my mom and see, wow, she's learning to be herself,
mm,
and she's learning that in her mid 50s. Um, but that's reflecting to me in my mid 30s to say, like, you have permission to do that too, Karastin. Like, I don't know, it's something different when you have people in your corner that that even if you make a bad decision, they're going to love you.
mm,
Um, Even if you have to go back, and you should go back and say you're sorry and, man, I messed up, you know. But when you have that mimicked from a parent,
mm,
especially, man, it does something to you,
mhm,
And I know that everybody's not blessed with that, and everybody doesn't get that experience. And how lucky I am to have that from not just one of my parents, but both of them. Um, when they make mistakes, they come back to me and say, "Oh, I messed up. Like, will you forgive me? That wasn't how I should have handled that." My mom's working through her own stuff, right? And But I can go to her and say, oh, that's not how we do that in our family, you know? Um, and she can do that to me, and I think those lessons in a really safe place have helped me become a leader in places that I might not feel as secure and safe. Um, and I think we're I'm always growing, you know, and I want to still maintain that eyes wide open. Who am I around? What lessons can I learn from them, even if they're different than me? Um, and take them and hold them to heart.
Mhm. Gosh, you've had these experiences that you talked about your grandfather and all that you learned about how to be in the world. What do we really want? What do we want our life to be about? It's service to others. And so that real stable beacon, and then to see your mother be in one place and then see her grow and develop. That's so wonderful to have those examples in your life. So many times we tell ourselves stories about others when they've caused us pain or they're going about in the world in a way that we think is inauthentic or destructive or whatever it might be. And many times we just pigeonhole people like that's who they are. But we don't want that to people to say that about us, oh my goodness, I don't want people to hold me to who I was when I was 16 or 25 or 36 or as I age, I want to change. I want to develop. I want to be better tomorrow than I was today. But then I also need to extend that grace to others. Who somebody is right now, they're not done, right? Just like the story you opened with, somebody could, because of tragedy in their life, go down a different road. I mean, this is the wonderful thing about life is that the future isn't set. It's also very scary, which means that we have to continue, we can't let ourselves go when it comes to developing the virtues, right? We're going to be humble if we practice humility. We will be courageous if we practice courage and kind, if we practice kind and curious if we practice it. I love this eyes wide open, right? If this is the mantra that we're looking at, the possibility that we will continue to see more and more and deeper and
Mm-hmm.
broader, and the idea that I'm not just learning from the people who are in positions of power, but everybody legitimately has something very genuine and deep to contribute to my growth if I choose to see it,
Right.
right? And it's a choice. Do I choose to see the 7-year-old who was serving me tea and the delight this person has, or do I want to minimize them and say, oh, they're so cute, they don't know what's going on? Or to really speak to that child and then, all the way through it, it's all so much about perspective. What are we going to choose to see? Are we going to choose to see that people have infinite value and worth, that people have good days and bad days, and so do we? And then go about the world that way. One thing I want to say about what you said about leadership, I think it's a really good model of when people talk about flattening leadership structures, I think it could be very confusing because, as you said, we need someone who's making that decision when the rubber meets the road, right? There needs to be some sort of hierarchical in most things because people are in charge of different realms. They make the final decision. If everything's in committee, things typically are watered down and nothing happens, right?
Right.
And yet we have subject matter experts. We learn from others. We're not the smartest person in the room. We know our role. And so, how do we really genuinely collaborate with others and see them and fulfill our role within the organization? Sometimes it's as the final decision maker. Sometimes it is as collaborator or as contributor or just the worker bee. We have all these different kinds of roles and really thinking about, because a lot of times when people ascend to leadership roles, they like the collaboration till it goes like this, and now it's the control and command. I'm in charge, right? This a little the power that goes to the head, right?
Right.
Um, uh, and of course, that's not what feeds into people. That's not what how people feel this belonging. It's not how organizations grow. And the work that you do, like we just talked about the concrete work of getting the stuff cleaned up and the people with the skills to rebuild. you're dealing with devastation. People have lost their lives. People have, and so then the people who are dealing with the people who've lost their lives or have been incapacitated or have lost everything, have lost businesses. Like, so you have all this human suffering
Mhm.
on top of just the hard, the work, the physical labor that needs to happen. So how do you deal with that as a labor, the emotional labor on top of we need to get these things painted and cleaned up?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, Again, when you're working with people and you're doing the work of really the work of humanity, right? Um, the humaning work, it is emotionally taxing. It will break you. Um, in the same day that it lifts you to the highest you've ever been. Um, and it's so odd, it's so odd how you can go from seeing the lowest of lows to the highest of highs in one day when you're in this work of humaning. Um, and I think as people who are in this work, um, we have to have, it's very hard, but we have to try to have a sense of boundaries. Um, I was talking to the executive director of an organization I chair yesterday, and we're 3 years removed from the tornado. And we're making some decisions within the organization simply on office hours. What time are we going to be open, right? And this gal she is a go getter, man. She outworks anybody I think I've ever met. Um, but I had to tell her this isn't December 11th, 2021. This is, we're 3 years past that. And if we have another disaster and we need to keep that place open day in and day out, 24/7, we'll do it. But that's not the season we're at. And and so take your lunch, you know, go eat lunch. Um, and so I think that's what we have to do. We can get into this like this everything in our society, Mary, this. It's just it wants to put this emergent pressure on us. And then when we have a heart to give and we see the needs of people, and my goodness, it's overwhelming. It can all feel like an emergency. But as leaders, I think we have to realize that we can't fix it all and we can't give anything if we're empty ourselves. You know, I found myself at a place of being incredibly empty a few I don't know, maybe 6 7 months ago. And it was people around me that looked at me and said, I don't know that you're okay. um that really helped me see, like, I can have this heart to do all of the good things, and I can be doing really good things, but if I'm doing it at the detriment of my own soul, then what good is it to anybody? And so I had to make some changes in my own life, um, to pull back from some situations, to change my rhythms, um, and it's helped. I still get to give, and I still get to serve, and I still get to have an impact, but I'm not doing it at the detriment of my own soul and my own heart, um, and my own marriage or relationships. Like, I I am trying to learn, and I think it's the work of people who have this forward facing service heart kind of love in them. I think it's our work to hold both, to give of ourselves and also to receive. Um, it's the work of opening doors and walking through doors that are open for you. It's the work of seeing and being seen. It's the work of listening and being heard. Um, creating creating spaces in your own life that you get filled up. I was talking about my mother earlier, and And I have a wonderful family. I do, and I have a very supportive um, friend group. I have a very supportive husband, and it is because I have those things that I can go out and give of myself. Um, and I think that's our work, is to make sure that we're built up so we can build something else, that we're filled up where we can fill something else. But it takes a lot of work, and it takes having good boundaries. It takes saying no. It takes knowing what you want, and those are really hard things. And as leaders, um, I think that's the work of our lives, is to figure out our own selves, um, and to do the really hard work to um, make sure that this is good, and then give out of that place.
This work-life balance, and sometimes when it's the work of humanity, of helping people who are are in distress, and there is obviously lots of turmoil and distress. It can feel like, well, that's our life, and so everything is work, work, right? And so instead of really finding, as you've said, if I'm empty, I have nothing to give, and this burnout. And the problem with burnout that we don't realize is that once we've reached it, the time to recuperate for some people is never. Sometimes it's years, depending on how much they have strung themselves out. So if you were talking to yourself 2 years ago, okay, what kind of advice, like not just platitudes, but like real actionable advice, do you think you could have given yourself, that yourself 2 years ago could have heard, to not reach this kind of burnout?
Yeah.
What could you
Um,
have done differently?
that's a great question. I think I would, from where I was specifically, I think I would tell myself that um, it would it's going to be a little bit longer than you think. Like the where I was 2 years ago, I was entering into a season I thought would just be like a few months of something. It's going to be a little bit longer than you think, and it's going to lead to some really wonderful things and some really wonderful relationships. Um, and knowing, how do I say this? As I'm learning who I am, keeping in line with some of the things that really do make me me. Um, I don't know if that makes sense, but sometimes as you're learning and you're growing and you're learning new things about yourself and you're healing new parts of yourself, sometimes you can forget about these lessons you've learned, and they're kind of just stable things in you. For me, it was this: I love to work, and the particular season that I just really kind of came out of was this season of working with a faith organization, and I needed healing in that. You know, if this was a faith podcast, I'd love to go into that. We're not there. Um, but I found myself in my early 30s really needing healing from faith, and that's over the past 2 years, that's really where I found myself. But I think in the midst of that, I I got so caught up um, in healing that part, right, and trying to dig into that part, um, and I think I did, but I feel like I lost some of the take a deep breath, relax, have some fun. Like everything is not so serious. Um, so I think that might be what I tell myself, is like, use your PTO. Um, don't worry about what what people are gonna think. Like the people, and I know it, the people I was surrounded with, I'm still surrounded by them. They love me, and it might feel urgent, but it's not. You know, I'm not a heart surgeon. I'm not a brain surgeon. I'm dealing um, with faith in that particular season. And so um, don't let the weight of that crush you. You know, I
when we think about the issues that our younger selves have gone through, and if we, we want to prevent harm from anybody, but certainly ourselves as well. Of course, sometimes we just go through it, right? There wasn't a way that we could have seen. Um, but it's always, always right to give ourselves grace, right? Most of us, of course, are our harshest critic. Most of us would not talk to others the way that we talk to ourselves. And it's unacceptable. Each individual has infinite value and worth. And I believe we have a duty to treat ourselves with kindness. Because if we aren't treating ourselves with kindness, the kind that we're going to give others is going to be shallow. It's not going to be as genuine and robust as it could be if we aren't first loving ourselves. And loving ourselves, of course, is not vanity. It is the root of all, right? Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Well, if you're
Yeah.
not going to be able to love your neighbor very well, if you don't really love yourself,
Yeah.
um, and love is a very robust concept. It is not shallow. It is very deep and powerful and meaningful and demanding. It's very demanding to love.
Hmm.
Um, Yeah, you said a variety of things that I wanted to pick up on, but I see our time. Um, and so as we go into the new year,
Yeah.
2025, what do you think needs to happen so that not only are all workers treated with dignity and respect, but they're encouraged to thrive?
Mm. That's a big question. Um, I think maybe heading into 2025, we're as a culture and an American society, things are interesting, and they're going to be really interesting. Um, and I think that maybe no matter what's going on around us, that we kind of hone in, um, and see what work is there to do right in front of us. You
Hmm.
know, um, no matter what's going on in the world, no matter who's in what position. Um, I think I might attribute this quote to someone that it's not, but I think there's a quote by Mother Teresa that says, "If you want to go home and or if you want to change the world, go home and start with your family," or something like that. But I think that's where, like, that fairness and I think that's where it comes in is when we treat ourselves that way, when we treat the folks that are right in front of us with that dignity, with that fairness, then I hope that we live in a world where that kind of spreads. You
Hmm.
know, um, we're never. Um, I think there's a lot of empaths that have tried. We're never going to change the. There is a lot of darkness in this world, and there's a lot of light. And I think that our job is to be the light, and to shine that light right in front of us and see who we can help and take care of ourselves and to take care of others.
I think that's a wonderful message. I agree. Local is always better. I mean, we want to change the world up top, but you don't love the world. You love the particular person that is your neighbor. Like the actual particular person is not an abstract. And so, right, I love that quote from Mother Teresa. Another one that I like is everybody wants to change the world, but nobody wants to do the dishes.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And so it is in our circle. So if you want to be a better leader, think about the people around you. How can you serve them? How can you speak into them? How can you really, even in a work situation, it's always appropriate to love. It is always appropriate to care. And in loving and caring organizations or teams, you will succeed. Even if your business goes bust, you succeed because what we really want, what really matters at the end of our life, of course, is love, the quality of our relationships. And so as you put good into the world, you may not always see it immediately, but I do believe that what we put out into the world has everything to do with who we are becoming, because you could be the king in the palace and be miserable, and you could be the person on the street and be content. It's not about the external. It is always about the internal. Who are we? How do we feel? And so, you know, the change, the love, the care is always about who am I? Well, what am I doing specifically?
Mm.
But my organization, okay, those are problems, but my country, whatever. Those are whatever issues, and they're issues, and we can fight for justice. But our energy ought to be in, most of our energy is loving ourselves and our neighbor, the people around us. And that's the ripple effect, right? The
Mhm.
more we do that, that's the new social media trend for 2025. How do
I
we
hope
love
so.
better? How do we love
Yeah.
better?
Yeah,
So,
I hope so. Yeah, I do.
well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been so delightful talking with you. And I hope you have a wonderful 2025.
Thank you, Mary. You too. Thanks for having me on.
Take care. Conflict restoration. Our music is courtesy of Dove Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.